My name is Niklas Endin. I love to work with data, people, and technology, and building stuff by combining all three of them, which is good. Since the last 10 years, I've been building BookBeat together with the great team of people at BookBeat. And today I represent them, and they are a team of 160 analysts, developers, marketers, and book lovers. And what we have done during the last 10 years, besides PowerPoints, are actually getting 1.2 million people every month pay for books through our service. And what they pay on average is 13 euros, which amounts to a lot over a full year. And we're present all across Northern Europe. And what we offer to the users, which is the reason why they pay us, they don't just do it because we have a nice app. We give them the easiest way to discover and enjoy digital books. And for you as publishers, what we do is we get people to spend more time and money on books, because that is kind of an end goal also if you work with commercial publishing. And I often use this graph that I will show you now to explain what we are doing, because audiobook listening isn't kind of the same beast as reading books in the end of the day or when you have time. Through audiobooks, books can become a natural part of people's everyday life. In the last 3 years, when I've done a presentation here in Frankfurt, I've shown this graph. So now I'm going to show you a big change that we have seen during the last year in our numbers. First, this is the graph that shows how listening was distributed by our users over a full week back in 2023, where you see the commuter peaks in the morning, the afternoon, and then the people going to bed listening to books. But you also see the drop on Friday and Saturday when people have a social life. Then one thing happened in 2024, where you see a huge increase on Saturday during midday and on Sundays during the midday. We were, of course, shocked. We thought that we had a stable behavior here, which is good then when we look at it this year. You see a really big drop on Saturday in the middle of the day and on Sundays in the middle of the day. No, jokes aside, it's a real stable behavior that is built up. As soon as people start listening to audiobooks, it becomes a part of their everyday life, and they don't just stop doing it just because it's a new year. It becomes a consistent part of how they respond to books in their life. So who are the target audience that then becomes book listeners? What ages are signing up for BookBeat? Overall, it's primarily people younger than 35 years old. So the biggest target group of people signing up for BookBeat are between 25 and 34 years old. Here we do see a difference between a more immature market and a mature market. For instance, in the Nordics, we have a much higher share of users over 50 and 60 that are signing up. And the reason for that is that the market penetration have passed 10%. So over 10% of the population actually are paying for audiobook service every month. But here in Germany and, for instance, Poland, almost everyone is below 30 and are now the early adopters signing up. Then, which books do the users start and spend time with? Which is, of course, a key question to get the answer if you're a publisher. And they are pretty different. And I'm now going to show a graph that is actually new material, so I don't just reuse what I talked about last year. And this is a segmentation of all of the different categories in BookBeat. Of course, some of them are hard to fit in, but at least an overall view. Looking at the share of starts, and this is which categories have the users started in BookBeat, you see that crime is the most popular one, of course impacted by us being really big in the Nordics where crime is really big. But you also see that non-fiction is really popular. You also see that children's books are extremely popular. But then you see some other categories are also really big. If we then instead look at the share of hours spent in books, this is how it looks. And here you see a discrepancy, and I'm going to explain that in the following slides, where you see that non-fiction is lower than the share of start, and you see especially in children's book that there's a big drop between those two. But you also see some categories overperforming here, for instance crime, but also fantasy, where we have double the amount of listen hours compared to how many starts there in that category. And to explain why we see this discrepancy, I of course want to turn back to the different dimensions we use to understand how audiobooks are performing in our service. Because there is a difference when it's audio streaming, because you can follow the user from interest to actually real consumption of the book, not just knowing that they were interested. For instance, that is what drives them making a buying decision of a physical book. We here actually see how they engage with the book. So relevance is of course key. Do people actually want to start the book? Really important. Then it's the drop-off rate, share of users that stop listening in the beginning of the book. Did you engage the audience and get them to continue listening? Of course important. Finish rate, how big of a share of the users that started the book listen all the way to the end? Then book rating and narration rating, because they can be two different things. Was it the narrator that drew the book up, or was it the book itself that stood on their own legs? Then we have our pretentious index, which is more of a joke internally, but it shows how big of a share of the people that start or save this book in their bookshelf never spend time with it or start listening to it, just want to show off that they have it. And then we have the revenue potential. Does this listening to this book drive long-term loyalty in our service? And looking at the two main categories or dimensions here, we want to especially bring up relevance and finish rate, because you want as many people as possible to start listening to a book, and then you want them to listen all the way to the end. That is what drives a lot of listening hours. And there are some key differences here between different categories. For once, nonfiction is extremely popular. Our most started book ever is a nonfiction book. So nonfiction is popular in our type of service. The problem is only around 30% listen all the way to the end of the people that start the most popular nonfiction books. And that can be because they get the subject right away, or they just feel like there's no real murder mystery here. I get the full picture, and I can be a person that say that I've listened to Sapiens. And then we have the fiction and nonfiction books that are more standalone and story-driven. They often have around 60% finish rate. And the reason why it's a little bit low is because so many people start them. They are phenomenon titles, and a lot of people, what should I listen to? Listen to this. And then they start listening to Where the Crawdads Sing. Most of them finish it, but it ends up somewhere around there. And then here in the lower right corner, you have the kind of gold mine for publishers in audio streaming, which is fiction. Fiction that is part of a series, but is also story-driven, where people feel, I cannot miss the end. I have to listen all the way to the end. I cannot just drop this book. It's engaging me too much. And this, of course, impact listening time, and especially serious impact listening time, because people find a world that they love and they just want to spend as much time as possible in it. And here I want to talk about an example, and I used Fort Wing as kind of a reference case, because it's a book that was released for the first time, I think 3 years ago, and during the last couple of years it has been the biggest series in the world with the following titles: Iron Flame and Onyx Storm. And that's part of the fantasy genre. What you see in the graph here is the share of started books that are part of a series based on the genre. And this a little bit explains what I showed you earlier, this discrepancy between start and listened hours, where you see of the crime books started, 82% was part of a series. But people dare to try new things too, and then that, of course, becomes a new series. In novels, it's a little bit of an even split. A lot of the phenomenon titles are there, so people dare to start new novels. Then you have children's books, and kids, if they love a character, they will just push play as many times as possible. But here you also see nonfiction. Most of the nonfiction books are connected to a certain subject and don't have really a follow-up in more books that you want to listen to, which makes it, of course, harder to build a loyal audience for nonfiction books, even though they can be extremely popular. And then you have the other genres, of course, performing really high in share of listening that are part of series. I want to do some myth busting too. One myth is that, I think this was perhaps especially when we started BookBeat back in 2016, I heard some people talk about media has to be bite-sized. People don't have time in their active life to listen to a long book. This is a myth. If we look at the average length of the books in BookBeat based on the different genres. And this is the listened to books. So it's not the average length of the books in our catalog. It's the average length of the books that actually have been listened to. You see that the average length of a fantasy book in our service is 14 hours. And people listen all the way to the end of them. Crime books are 11 hours long. And then you see the other categories are pretty much the same, but then you see a drop in nonfiction and in children's books. And this explains a lot also why the average listening time is lower in that category. But it also gives you evidence if you publish an engaging books that people don't want to let go of, they will spend 14 hours. In some cases, they spend 40 hours on a new fantasy book because it's so engaging. So again, long books isn't a problem. They are actually a pretty good thing if it's a book that actually engages the listener. So what about the long tail? And this is, since I started out in the industry, have been one of the key things everybody tried to push about streaming, that you get so much backlist effect and just put the books out there, they will live forever. I probably said that on an occasion or two also. So let's contradict a little bit of those things. First, I've cherry-picked a data point that I wanted to share with you. And it looks similar to perhaps some of the other data points you heard here today. 97% of the around 200,000 local language audiobooks that we have in Sweden, Finland, Germany, and Poland, which are our biggest markets, have been listened to. Sounds great. Just publish and you will get so much money from it. Unfortunately, that's just part of the picture I want to show you. Because in truth, the commercial long tail, it is long in digital, but it's not that long. So 97% of those 200,000 titles have had at least one start, which sounds great. But 81% have had at least 10 starts, also pretty good. 50% have had over 100 starts. And then it's only around 20% or 40,000 audiobooks that have had over 1,000 starts. And for you as publishers, you know that you need at least that from every retailer to be able to fund the production you have done. So we have 160,000 books that haven't gotten over 1,000 starts. And they are, of course, in some cases, really good books, but they haven't gotten through the noise of having too many books in the service. So as a publisher, you need to focus on where do you have the biggest commercial potential, not just trying to publish as much as possible, because you will lose out in these type of services, even though everything is available all the time. And the algorithm can make the right book find the right person. The algorithm probably will make the book that everyone else loves also find the right person. So it's not easier just because you're in digital. One other thing connected to the long tail and backlist is this number. And I showed it briefly 1 year ago, but I want to repeat it again and update it a little bit. It shows that over 70% of the books that have been started in BookBeat during 2025 have been released during the last 4 years. So even though we have a lot of titles that have been published far beyond, way back, the books that are started have primarily been released during the last couple of years, because active authors release new titles in their series, active publishers find new trends that people want to follow. So it's not just that you put a lot of books in the catalog and it will live for itself. You need books that are constantly activated by new books in the series or certain trends. And hopefully one day you will have it blow up on TikTok, but you cannot rely on that. So primarily active publishing is what pays off in our type of service, even though a book lives forever. So you will get starts, but if you want commercial success, you need to be active and not just have a catalog lying there. And all of this leads up to this overall conclusion. I don't want to write you on the nose. All of you guys know this, and you've probably heard people saying, just publish bestsellers, it's easy. It isn't easy. But I just want to emphasize this as much as possible, because It's so easy when there's a boom somewhere that you start to do a lot of things that you aren't normally doing, instead of focusing on the great publishing you do and see, can we do this in audio too? Can we expand it? Can we build on an authorship that is successful? Because that's probably the best way to build commercial success and take limited risk, instead of just saying, we have to have a big audio catalog to win this, because that probably won't be the solution. And some examples of what is successes. And again, I know it's not just about bestsellers, but bear with me to throw some examples of what works in audio. And these are the top titles from our different markets. If we start with Germany, I just heard from the last panel that Audible said that thrillers and murders are popular in Germany. For us, Germany is a romantic country, which of course fits my view of Germans. The top 3 most listened titles all time in BookBeat here in Germany are the Rebecca Yarros titles. Then we have Colleen Hoover, and then we have a lot of other titles in the same genre. We also have crime. It's really successful, but Germany is primarily a romantic country for us. So again, build your view by combining different services point of view here. Then we have some other examples. Here is Finland, and I see people from Pottermore here, so congratulations. Finland is Harry Potter country. The top 6 titles listened ever in BookBeat in Finland is Harry Potter, and then you see Where the Crawdads Sing on place number 7. And then we have a lot of local authors also successful in Finland, but Harry Potter, you actually own the show in Finland. And then we have Sweden, one of the most mature audio markets in the world. Here, Harry Potter, you get the first spot, but then there's some other things taking spots here, which of course Crawdads Sing, and also some Scandinavian crime with Kepler and Läckberg, but also Lucinda Ryler books. All of the books on this list, I think, is almost around 20 hours long. Again, to support my point earlier, a long book works pretty good in digital audio. And then we have our 4th biggest market and our fastest growing one, which is Poland. Again, Harry Potter country, congratulations. And then you see The Witcher taking some positions too, which is also fantasy. And then in the middle of their top list, you see Klopski, I think I pronounced it correctly, which is about a female peasant that was released 2 years ago and have been the biggest selling title in Poland during the last couple of years. It works perfectly in audio, but nobody would have pitched it as an audiobook. So again, you have to understand that it's not just one size that fits in audio. It can be pretty much a lot of different things. And that's kind of the message of all of the titles on this list. None of them were produced for audio, but all of them have become the biggest audiobook sellers out there, bestsellers out there. And keep that in your mind when you're looking at how do we go into audio. Do stuff with the authors that you already publish, and can we make them sell even more and expand their audience through audio, not trying to do something completely new. One other thing with all of the books that you saw on this list was that they were the local language version of these books. All of them were translated. Of course, English works well, but it's primarily local language that works on our different markets. What you see here is share of listening per language on our biggest markets, where you see in Sweden, 94% of the listen time is in Swedish, and then around 6% is English. You see the same pattern in some of our other markets, for instance, Germany, Finland, and Poland. And then you see the kind of outliers, which is the Netherlands and also Norway. And Norway, it's 100 reasons for that. And I think Netherlands, I think overall is really focusing on consuming books in English. But you also see that it's a pretty local game. So it's primarily the local language titles that people are consuming. Okay, you cannot do a presentation these days without touching the subject of AI. So last, at least something about AI that I want to bring up. And I know it was a panel here and they're more experts than me, but what does the data say? And first of all, one thing that we see I tried to do a graph with this, but it was 0 and 100% of what people listen to. So instead I do a box with text. AI narration, still is mostly a buzzword with little real impact on listening in our service. We have some publisher releasing titles with AI narration, and perhaps it will be something big in the future. But right now, when people choose between two different books, they often choose a premium narrator that they know and that they feel that they kind of get a stamp of quality from. But this can of course change. But right now, if we want people to pay at least 13 euros per month for our service, we have to focus on it being a premium service, and having premium narrators helps with that. So far, not that much more than a buzzword, but perhaps it will be something bigger in the future. One thing where we have seen an impact from AI translation, if it's used wisely, and this is a translation of text, so you can get books translated to a new language and then it can be narrated in that local language. Here we see an advantage for publishers because time flies so fast now. And if we look at, for instance, the Rebecca Yarros book that was released for the first time 3 years ago, in some countries, even 2 years after that release, it wasn't translated. And I think for publishers, if you can utilize AI to faster reach the market with the book so you don't miss out on a trend, it can of course be great, but don't do it too broadly if it doesn't make sense. Because I think overall, the quality is so important for our users if they're not to choose something else from our catalog. So that was something about AI. Let's wrap this up because I have 1 minute left. First, what I said in the beginning, more people than ever are listening to books, which is a good thing. The demand is out there. On the other hand, there's a lot of competition there. Nothing lasts forever, and it's not a green field you can go in and own. People explore pretty widely, but if you want them coming back, fiction is the thing you need to focus on, because that's the place where you can build an author over time in a world that they just want to engage with. 60% of all started books are part of series. It doesn't mean that you lost out if you haven't started a series yet, because Rebecca Yarros shows that it can be created and become the biggest thing out there. But you have to have something that builds an audience over time and not just engage them one time if you want to get hold of all of the potential in digital audio. And last but not least, winning in audio streaming isn't about quantity. And I will say this over and over again in my speeches. Publishers need to be active. You have to build on trends that you see and not just follow them and start to produce a catalog perhaps that was popular 5 or 6 years ago. So just publish bestsellers. It isn't harder than that. Thank you for listening.